everyone, to another edition of 45 Forward, where our mission is to help our listeners from Los Angeles to Long Island make your second half of life even better than the first. As we reach our middle ages, most people say they want to continue aging in place, living in their current house as long as possible. And as we enter the third year of this shifting pandemic, many families who have spent a whole lot more time at home have decided that, well, they really like their place, and now is the time to invest in it. So, as interior designer Dafna Adler points out, homeowners are transforming aging in place to living in place, creating a plan for the future that begins in the present. In today's episode, Daphna, the principal of her own interior design firm, talks about a number of components of universal design, which incorporates design features from multiple generations, which may require some renovations or modifications to accommodate changing needs as we age. But Daphna goes further, taking into account both aesthetic and functional issues that improve safety, comfort, and the daily quality of life. She'll talk about how people tend to perceive colors differently as they age, how lighting becomes even more critical, especially on steps, how to declutter rooms and choose comfortable chairs, and ways to bring nature indoors to take advantage of the calming and comforting benefits of the natural world. And Daphne will spell out how to plan ahead to get the changes that matter to your life now while adding value that lasts as you age. So now let's meet today's guest, Dafna Adler. Daphne, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Ron. Happy to be here.
Great. So before we get into the actual topic, I'm always interested in backgrounds of my guests because people have things of interest to say to the 45 Forward crowd, but they've also had interesting careers themselves and interesting journeys. So tell me a little bit about your background, about how you got to where you are today.
Okay. So, interior design is a second career for me.
Mm-hmm.
I started out actually in the computer industry,
Huh.
completely different. I was a computer programmer, but it wasn't where I wanted to be. When I was much younger, I had a dream of going into the architecture and to a design world. And for a variety of personal reasons, I ended up as a computer programmer, but design back and be back. And I did go at middle age to back to
Mm-hmm.
school and did study interior design. And now I'm doing what I was meant to do all along. And I used my experience that I gained in the computer knowledge that I have makes it easier for me to use the tools that are available these days. The experience that I got in the corporate world in terms of managing projects is something that is very useful for me now in order to make projects happen on time and in budget. So the
Yeah.
skills never get lost.
Right, right. That's a great story. I think that happens to a lot of people more than we realize, but I think that that's something that's becoming clearer to people that it's career is an evolving thing. It's not and even when you're younger, you don't really know what drives your passion. You sort of discover it. So we have what we call not quite accidental careers, but certainly evolving careers. So I'm glad you've taken this one. So let's talk a little bit about living in place. Because I know that I've done quite a bit of work about aging in place, but a lot of it, when we first met, I thought your approach was interesting because it incorporated a lot more things. Usually, when I talk to people about aging in place, it's like, all right, making accommodations, in bathrooms and in kitchens and so forth, some of which you do. But talk a little bit about your perception about changing from aging in place to living in place and what your clients are asking you for.
Right. So it what I find is if we stay in the house and we don't modify, houses were built differently. Many of the houses that were built 1940s, 1950s, 1960s were built a little bit differently. And if something happens as we grow older, if somebody falls, breaks a hip, has difficulty walking, and all of a sudden you need to make changes, they have to be done quickly in order for that person to move back into the house. So there isn't as much time to think about doing it right. And it also costs a lot more when you have to do something last minute and you have to bring
Right.
somebody in to make changes. And especially now during COVID times, it's a lot harder to get everything done and quickly. What I find is that after living in a house for several decades, many people, middle aged, start to think about renovating, updating, and that's the time to really plan the space, plan the materials that will be used, and plan the lighting and all the things that are involved in design. So that may mean opening up the doorways and the
Hmm.
hallways to wider room. It may mean installing LED lights so that you have good lighting as you go along, and or in bathrooms you need grab bars. If you're already going to make up redo those rooms, then there are a lot of considerations into what you could put in, um, and what you can prepare for the future.
Right, right. And I think that, as I mentioned in the introduction, a lot of people, myself included, have spent a lot more time at home. And I think that you start realizing, when in earlier days when I was commuting to work, for a period in the city and so forth, it was just a time of, okay, you just came back and you're unfortunately your house was sort of a waste station between, I mean, obviously you spent time with your family, but you spent a lot of time outside the house. So I think that with the pandemic, it has had the impact of making people think, and I can attest to this myself, like, oh, wait a minute, I really enjoy our place. It's really has a lot of capability and a lot of potential, and I enjoy being here. And so you've mentioned that people are now saying they want to invest in their house and they want to do it start now. And as you started to say before, while you're thinking about the future, what things make sense right now that also will make sense in the future. I mean, for me,
Right.
things like grab bars in the bathroom, or we're lucky to have fairly wide hallways, but things like that are useful right now, and you can really make use of it in your current life.
Right. So what I find is what for people who are working from home now or spending more time at home, the multi-purpose room has become much more common. So a lot of requests for a room that's both an office and a guest room,
Hmm.
or or a mud room and a laundry room, and for specifically for planning ahead. Um, the laundry room would probably, instead of being in the basement where it used to be, you might want to bring it up to the main level, or a bedroom, master bedroom suite that used to be upstairs may want to be on the main level. So then now you're shifting the location of these rooms, and when you're doing that, also preparing for being able to use it for multiple purposes,
Hmm.
because we are spending more time at home. Some
Right.
people want a gym at home, and they want an office, and they want um, perhaps they need another place for the kids to play because they're working in another bedroom. So more uh, spaces that can be used for multiple purposes.
Right. Right. Now, of course, the pandemic has had an effect on our planning and actually getting things done. So it's harder to get things done. So, what should people be thinking about in terms of planning ahead? How much planning do we require these days?
Right. So what I recommend in when I do actually any room,
Hmm.
let's take a bathroom for example. I recommend that all the items that are needed complete the room be ordered in advance and stored in the house. Because it can take several months for materials to come in. And if you start a project and right away need items, you're gonna only be able to choose for something that's in stock, and that's not always easy with the issues that we have now, containers and COVID and things coming in from overseas. I would order everything, store it in one place, in a garage or another room. Once all the items are in, and check to make sure that they're accurate and nothing's broken, then you start the project. And then it could go a lot faster and a lot easier, fewer problems, and everything is much more. Um, It's thought out ahead of time, but
Hmm.
the execution is much faster and
Right,
easier.
right, right. Yeah, kind of like when you're making a meal, right? It's like get all those ingredients and put them out there and do all the,
Yeah.
the sous chef work early, get it all done. And when you actually make the meal, it'll go a lot faster than searching for stuff constantly. But so are there any particular issues these days with things that are hard to get or, in other words, are there still these supply chain issues? Are we still facing that?
Yes, that's really a serious problem. Small things that can, like switch plates. That you can get it. Used to be able to get it in a day or a week. Now I may have to wait months until a specific item, a specific color comes in. Um, and also dates that I receive for when an item will be in seem to get pushed back more and more. So you can't really rely on a promise from your source that an item will be in stock in 2 months, because there are delays between the shipping delays and trucking delays um, and other people getting sick and not showing up to work. All of this is causing the supply chain, creating a problem when you have a project to do. So if you have a room that are not using often, let's say you're doing a
Hmm.
living room, and that's not, and you don't have a deadline to when you need to get it done, you can probably order this, and wait 6 months to a year until all the items come in. But if you're doing a bathroom which is functional and you need it, I would say take my approach.
Right,
Get
right.
everything in first.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's you've mentioned before, with this sort of planning, you'll also have a better chance of getting what you actually want. I think if you're if you basically crunch the time, things change, things may go wrong, and you don't have as much flexibility this way. Especially when a lot of these renovations, I guess the ones that is it still the ones that are people doing still a lot of kitchen work and bathroom work? What kinds of things are they doing most these days?
Yeah, everything. There are a lot of changes in design style in the kitchen, um, and when it comes to the aging in place or living in place
Hmm.
specifically, what I find is useful to think about in the kitchen is being able to see, let's say you open up a drawer and the light automatically comes on,
Hmm.
or being able to reach um, items that are too high up or too far down. As we get older, it's hard for us to think about this.
Hmm.
It's not something we want to think about, but does get harder to bend all the way down and reach something in the back of a drawer, or to reach all the way up at the top of the cabinet. So um, there are specific things that have been designed to make that easier. There are cabinets where you can pull down the mechanism, and instead of reaching up with your hand, you can just pull down the shelves. There are certain drawers that are just easier to uh, get. The way it's designed, it's easier to reach for whatever it is that you're looking for. Um, Also, depending on the height of the counter, can be modified. Um, those are some, and good lighting, where you place the lighting. And definitely under cabinet lighting is critical for tasks, for
Hmm.
food preparation or for whatever tasks, and overhead lighting, using LED lights in key areas is very important.
Right, right. And what I've discovered personally is over the years that if you want to have dimmable lights, now that I'm discovering things I never realized with when the lights start blinking and like what's going on, you've got to buy dimmable LED lights.
Yes,
You've got to have it compatible with the switches that you've got, and
that's correct.
so stuff like that. It's like, yeah, there are a lot of considerations. I never, you know, never thought there was so much to changing a light bulb, but there is. So yeah, and I think
Yeah.
what you mentioned too that we discovered in our kitchen too that my wife and I are on the shorter side And I think that's something to really, think about, because I do think some people who were, involved in renovation, contractors are taller. It's like, yes, you're taller, but I would, you know, other than the stuff that's too down, far down below, I think that is an issue of, if you're going to redo things, thinking about the height, because I think that, especially as we get older, right? I mean, that people say, well, avoid getting up on steps, ladders, and stools, and reaching too high. Put the stuff that you want where you're going to really use it mostly. And I think that's made a big difference for me, figuring out where to put stuff that I use it all the time, and then stuff that you don't use all the time, put somewhere else.
Even the faucet and the faucet levers, they should be easy to reach and easy to control.
Hmm.
And that depends on the design that you choose of those controls.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah, I think that's both with the levers on the faucets and the door handles, right?
right,
Instead of the rotary door handles,
right.
have the levers that are easier to press down as you get older. You're not turning
Yeah,
and so forth.
yeah. And as
Yeah.
far as lighting is concerned, I also found that those of us that grew up with incandescent lighting,
Hmm.
uh, have to get used to the LED. LED lighting is not measured in wattages the way the old incandescent bulbs are. So there are different Kelvin temperatures, and people who are not aware of the type of lighting that's needed, um, some people really are uncomfortable with very bright white LED lights, and they
Right.
do come different temperatures means different lighting. So some of it is a little yellower, some of it is a little brighter. Depending on the color that's used for the cabinet and for the counter and the big items,
Hmm.
you need a different color temperature for the light. And I don't want to get more technical than
Well,
that.
that's good. So actually, we're coming up with a break right now. So we'll do a little bit more about lighting when we come back from break. But folks, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back in a couple minutes. There's much more to come with the interior designer, Dafna Adler. So don't go anywhere. Welcome back, folks. We're talking today with Dafna Adler, a leading interior designer, talking about accelerating the concept of aging in place in the future to living in place right now, as well as the future. So before the break, we were talking to Daphne about lighting and the importance of different kinds of lighting, and she was talking about bright lighting, incandescent lighting, LED lighting, and then also she and I have talked before about just the different lighting, but also different colors. Let's talk a little bit more about colors and what they mean, because that's something I hadn't thought about until we talked about it before.
Yes, as we age, we do perceive color differently. It seems that the color in the blue range
Hmm.
becomes harder to see. Some people develop cataracts. It may be just the beginning of it, and they may not even be aware that the colors look a little harder to discern.
Hmm.
So when you're looking at colors that are muted, they may look a little muddy, a little unclear, and you may not even be aware.
Hmm.
So having colors with strong contrast is really important.
Hmm.
And that's particularly important when it comes to depth perception near steps.
Interesting.
In order to be able, or any changing elevation, there's sunken living rooms, if there's a step up to any room, it's important to show that there is a difference in color in order to prevent somebody by accidentally falling or tripping. Um, and even the color of fabrics on
Hmm.
furniture, it should be more saturated. And you can still use the blue. Blue is still blue. It just
Hmm.
may appear not as um, not accurate.
Hmm.
And so it's important to know what colors you're putting next to it in order to make that color stand out.
Oh.
Now, lighting works directly with color, because if you put an incandescent bulb tends to have a yellow cast. If you
Okay.
put it next to a blue, yellow and blue creates a sort of a green cast to it.
Hmm.
And that changes the way an item can look. When you put an LED with Kelvin temperature 2700, if we get technical, that's as
Okay.
close to incandescent. If we go with Kelvin temperature 3000, that's more like daylight, and that's more white light, and that may be a little bit brighter
Hmm.
in the room. Anything beyond a Kelvin temperature of 3000, in my mind, should not be used in a residential space, because that's much too white, much too bright, and harsh, and then changes the way colors and the way a room it feels. You want
Right.
rooms in your home to be cozy and comfortable, and and the lighting should remain between in that range.
Right. So when I look at it, I see daylight. That's too harsh in
No,
terms of.
daylight is fine. Kelvin
Okay.
temperature 3000 is fine, but
Okay.
not more than that. So there
Okay.
are some bulbs that are shown to be residential lighting, 4000, 5000. Now stay away from those bulbs, because
Right.
they're much too harsh and too hard. And uh, at any age, but in particular for those of us that are aging and have grown up with those incandescent lights, those bright lights are just not comfortable.
Right. Right. Although there, yes, and the one area though that I think you touched on briefly, but perhaps again we should talk about it, is just having enough lighting though, whether not too bright, but around stairs and where there are changes in direction in the room, because I think that's something that I've noticed that I'm not quite as I don't know, intuitive in my or fluid in my motions, and so I need a little brighter light to differentiate where I'm going, and especially on stairs,
Right,
where you tend
right.
to, there are balance issues as you get older. You try to minimize them, but they're there.
Yeah. So also you want to avoid anything that may be a potential tripping hazard. So
Hmm.
lower pile rug, and or area rug, or even stairs. On the stairs, if you can have a runner, but as long as it's not a high pile where you can potentially uh, depending on how the rug is put on there, or the runner. Uh, and if there is already, if those are already on the steps, then you can put lighting on the side, on the tread of every few steps. You can put
Hmm.
in a light, so this way you can really see where you're going when you're going up steps, and that may prevent a potential hazard.
Right, right. Yeah, I think when you mentioned rugs, that was one thing I recall in my mom's house years ago, was an issue, where there was you had, all these hardwood floors, and they were nice floors, and they wanted to have throw rugs and to leave the floors exposed. It's like, well, that's nice, but they're tripping hazards, and that's
Yeah,
a.
I wouldn't take away the rugs. You just have to know that there has to be a rug that is either. You can also secure the corners of the rug. So if somebody, starts to is not looking where they're not going, where they're going, or as we get older, it's harder to walk, lift up the leg. Some people begin to shuffle. Just low pile, and the corners should be secure.
Right,
And
right.
in the living room also, I feel that it's important to have, or in any room, your seating should be a little bit higher up than
Hmm.
what we used to be. It's a lot, it gets a lot hard. People's knees start to hurt, or it's a lot harder to get up from a seating position. So the chairs, the sofas, even the toilet seat should be
Hmm.
at a higher level, and having arms on these seats is probably a good idea.
Right, right. Yeah, I've noticed that myself. I get in these comfortable chairs. It's like, okay, now I've got to get up. And these chairs that where you sink in them. It's like, well, that's that's an issue. Yeah, getting
Yeah,
up.
you
Yeah.
don't have to give up on comfort.
Hmm.
The all of these chairs and sofas and all of you can still have comfort. It just has to be at the right kind of cushions, the right kind of design, so that if you're sinking back into a sofa, if you have a handle on the side that can help you lift up, that's already helpful.
Right.
You don't have to be on a stiff piece of wood in order
Right.
to have a comfortable home,
Right.
and that's appropriate for when you age.
Right. Right. And one of the things that I know is an issue too is one can talk about clutter, but even just sort of spacing, as you get older, about, having, an environment where you can move around easily, not bumping into things, not having sharp edges, obviously, I guess as we get older too, there are dual purposes. One for yourself, not bumping into it and having sharp edges. And then if you have grandchildren come over, the same thing, right?
Yes. So the way to avoid sharp edges is to let's say the living room, have a round or an oval coffee table,
Hmm.
um, or even a dining room table that doesn't have a sharp corner. But more importantly, if there's enough space to walk around, so in order to avoid that, before I go in and recommend any sort of piece of furniture, I always create a space plan, a two-dimensional space plan where every item in the room is measured and placed on a paper or computer or whatever it is, and then make sure that there is enough space to be able to walk around every piece of furniture.
Hmm.
Um, and this way you can avoid bumping into it. If there's too much furniture in the room, you're likely to bump into it and potentially hurt yourself. And it's
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that's one of the things is, less is more, right? I mean, you can, I think that sometimes we just try to crowd too many things into a room, and it's just like not a good idea to be able to
No,
maneuver around easily and safely, I think becomes an
yeah.
issue, as you get older, you know.
Well, right. What I find also is that people, it's good to put some thought into a room about how you're going to use it, what you may want to store there, because then what happens is people start to say, oh, okay, I have a bunch of magazines, I have a bunch of books, I have a bunch of things that start to clutter up in a room. And if you have a place for it, if there's no room on the floor, there's always room to hang stuff on the wall.
Hmm.
And there are other ways. If you have a place for everything, if you think ahead and plan and have a place for everything, then you can avoid clutter. And when you avoid clutter, you create more space and there's more room to breathe and it looks aesthetically better and it's safer also.
Right, right. Yeah, we talked before even about, if you have chairs around a table or something, or around, the room itself, if you're not really using them on a regular basis, put them away. Just bring them out when you need them, right?
Yes, I had a client that um, had special. We had regular dining room, but every once in a while, the holidays, we had folding chairs that matched the regular chairs.
Hmm.
But there was no. If you just stick it in the corner of the room, first of all, clutters the room, and secondly, there's no need for it except for those few occasions. So we actually built in the closet a place to hide those chairs, and then they're away, and it's not far from the dining room, but they're not there taking up room and taking up and creating clutter when they're not used. So there's so many things that you can hide and make a room feel clean and organized.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think that people talk about, you know, um, de-stressing, that there's a stressing element of clutter that I experienced myself. It's just like you can't, you know, uh, and you just can't think as clearly sometimes if there's too much stuff around. So, you don't have to be austere, but there are certain things that you can do. And one of the things that you've mentioned to me before on occasion is even stuff that you have on, like pictures and things like that on tables or pieces of furniture, if you want them, put them on the wall. Figure out a way to put them
Right.
on the wall.
Yeah. Or if you have a lot of standing photos, put floating shelves on the wall and place
Hmm.
them on shelves if that's important to you. If you have knickknacks that are sitting on surfaces, um, that can create visual clutter.
Right.
So you want to have it, um, nicely set up. You can put collections, um, picture frames.
Right. 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 Now, yeah, I think that just thinking about the rooms as you mentioned it before, kind of how you want this to look all the time, and to things that you enjoy all the time, as opposed to just um, having stuff that's sort of randomly placed, and basically, create an issue for you. Um, Now, there are other ways. What are other thoughts that you've mentioned to me that there are ways that you can um, bring nature into the house as well.
Yes, yes. So the whole field of biophilia that has
Hmm.
become very popular recently, and there've been studies that show that when we immerse ourselves in nature, it helps improve our well-being and makes us feel more connected. And in the home, that's become a very important consideration. And when I do the design work, I always think about whether there's something after the basics, after you have the functional items that you need in order to use the space, what are some of the organic pieces that we can bring in?
Hmm.
Plants, trees. They don't, if you don't have the green thumb, you can put in fake trees and, fake plants, but they still bring in an element of nature that makes us feel more connected.
Hmm.
And that's very important. Or maybe even the sound of water, like a water piece that you can hear running. That's also very soothing. Um, you can bring in the smells of the ocean if that's something that you
Hmm.
enjoy. It really can touch every sense, and makes a difference, scientifically makes a difference in the way we feel every day in
Right.
our home.
Right. Right. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Um, so I should, yes, I know you often hear about, plants are useful, they're helpful. They sort of balance out I guess, the oxygen, carbon dioxide levels, but also, um, you know, to me, having something green in the house and just keeping it green, and remembering to water it is important. But these are things which I think, yeah, I think that this has been a trend. I think that basically, there's been a lot of work about how, especially during the pandemic, about, we've been inside a lot. How do we get outside? How do we connect with nature? That there are lots of salutary effects of being out and outside. And I think in some ways, that this is a good alternative to bring some of the outside inside, especially on days like today when it's cold outside.
Yes, yeah. And if you don't want to be outdoors, but you still want the outdoors in your home, um, a corner of a room might be a perfect place
Hmm.
to put a tall tree.
Hmm.
Um, or if you, in your entranceway, if you want to have this the sound of water, soothing, that's a very nice place to kind of, as you come in, to have the zen-like effect. There's a lot of the feng shui
Hmm.
in the home is also about health and wellness, and that also is relevant to putting the right items in the room,
Right.
so that we feel better about it.
Right, right. Yeah, I think for me, the the most interesting case, I remember visiting a good friend of mine years ago. He lived in Northern California, and I visited their house in the country. And My wife and I walked into their house and looked in the middle of the house, and there's a tree, and it's not only a tree, it's a redwood tree that was growing in the middle of the house, which they felt was important. And I said, now that's bringing nature inside. That's for sure.
Yeah. Also, daylight is very important. If a
Mhm.
house is being designed, from uh, yeah, I guess on a more in a more concrete way, bringing in windows that bring in a lot of natural daylight is
Mhm.
also another way to allow us to feel nature, instead of having um, all these incandescent lighting that we were talking about before.
Right. Right.
Uh, uh, yeah.
Yeah. Good. Good. Um, yeah. So there's a good bit more to talk about, but we're coming up to another break. We're going to take another short break shortly. Um, and when we come back, don't go away. We have a good last segment coming up, folks. We're talking with Dafna Adler, leading interior designer. We'll take a short break, but don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Back, folks. We're talking today with interior designer Dafna Adler about how to think about aging in place to improve where you live right now and in the future. So, Daphne, in terms of it, what sorts of resources are there out there for folks to find out more about aging in place, interior design, and also including your work?
All right. So I could talk about some projects that I've done
Hmm.
that are specific to aging in place.
Okay.
I'll start with bathrooms,
Hmm.
which are modified to accommodate. Uh, they don't. There is a difference between aging in place and then creating something that's ADA, which is for people with wheelchairs.
Hmm.
But it is something to think about when planning a bathroom, making it large enough so that in case one day somebody will need more space,
Hmm.
come in with a wheelchair or walker, or whatever it is. So there's room in the space, wider doors. I would pay attention to transitions, any
Okay.
transition from room to room, making sure that the threshold doesn't have a step that you have to lift your foot and potentially be a hazard. Potentially, you can even stub your toe. So you can create thresholds that have what they call a Hollywood bevel, so that it's kind of a more of a smooth transition
Hmm.
of the threat between floor to floor, um, so you don't bump into it. And having showers instead of bathtubs. A lot of people are choosing to take out the bathtubs. You don't have
Hmm.
to climb into it, and
Right.
creating and putting in showers. And the showers that I put in are barrier-free showers, meaning
Mm.
that there is no barrier between the shower floor and the main bathroom floor.
Right.
But this can't be done without some forethought, because otherwise all the water is going to flood your bathroom.
Hmm.
So there has to be the floor has to be tilted or shifted somewhat to go so that you catch all the water that's coming down from the shower head into the drain.
Right.
I've used linear drains so that the water is captured in the right amount, in the right space, instead of flooding the whole bathrooms. Um, and creating a door that is wide enough, putting in a seat in the shower so that in case, and of course the grab bars that we
Right.
spoke about earlier. Uh, if you're not ready to put in grab bars, then at least you can prepare the wall behind the tiles so that it has enough what they call blocking, which is
Right.
so it's strong enough to be able to put in grab bars in the future, and you don't have to break walls and do all that. Also, aesthetically, grab bars now don't have to be very industrial looking. They
Right.
can be aesthetic and pretty, and that's the kind of look. So I have examples of some bathrooms that I've done on my website,
Mm.
which you can take a look at and see. that they look just like any other bathroom, but they're functional and they work very well. Um,
Yeah, I think that
and
I just think that as you said, you can do this aesthetically, and really it certainly you could say, well, this is more helpful as you get older and perhaps don't have quite as good balance, but really it's good for any age. I mean, anybody of any age can slip suddenly, and the floors can be slippery. And so I don't see any reason to wait for things like grab bars. They're useful at that's, of course, they call them universal design. It's universally good for any
that's right.
age, and for little kids too. They can or younger people. There's no there's always an opportunity for an accident or fall, and I think we should just not wait for that time.
Yeah. So another thing that's important is the type of material that you use on the floor in the shower. If you're using tile, I would use small tile so there's a lot of grout
Uh-huh.
because the soap can make the floor very slippery if it's a large tile. And then you would need those grab bars to stay to prevent yourself from falling. But
Mm,
you want the floor. I also avoid shiny or marble on the floor because of in order to prevent slippage.
right, right. Yeah, one of the issues I happen to like the idea of a bathtub, and we have one, but in our house, but I know what you're saying. They're problematic. I mean, stepping into them, stepping out of them. I guess that there are new designs where there's a door that you can get into a bathtub, right, in and out. But it's also hard to get up. You're sitting there, and yes, you can have sort of grab bars on a tub, but it takes some doing, and unfortunately, we're not at the stage where we have, like, these tilting chairs you can tilt yourself upright. We don't have tilting bathtubs that you can do
No,
that.
they haven't invented that yet.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Uh, there've been there are bathtubs with doors. I personally don't use them
Hmm.
because there've been problems with leaks from those doors. So I don't generally don't recommend them.
Right, right, right,
But
right.
maybe there's new design out there that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and you know, now what are what kinds of costs we talk about? I mean, obviously it varies a lot, but it seems to me that from what I've uh, read in various places, the cost effectiveness of making these kind of changes are largely in bathrooms and kitchens in terms of preserving value in a house, right?
Yeah, the most the bang for the buck is really a kitchen renovation or a bathroom renovation. That's where there are the most improvements that you can get your value and your money back from that. Um, it also is important to know that it really doesn't cost much more or much. There really isn't a difference in terms of building an aging and place appropriate kitchen or bathroom
Hmm.
because it's just a matter of understanding how the materials are applied and where to put it. So it's really worth the investment for personally and monetarily because you're not paying a lot more if you're already doing the renovation.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think a lot of the other things that you recommended in terms of just the spacing of things and looking at the furniture and is really about forethought, not so much
Yes.
expenses, just thinking about really what it is that you want to do and how you live. And
Yeah. So I say before you build a house, you generally have an architect draw plans and then
hmm.
they build the house. I
Right.
think when it comes to design, it's just as important to have plans and to know where the furniture is going to be, what size it's going to be, where it's going to sit in the room, and to think it through beforehand. And you save yourself a lot of cost and mistakes by planning ahead. And working with a professional also saves a lot of uh, potential mistakes of having furniture that is scaled appropriately into the room and that is proportional, that works well functionally as well as aesthetically.
Hmm. Yeah. Are you seeing any trends in terms of, people these days shifting from traditional designs to more modern, or are there any kind of changes that you see happening?
Yeah, well, I think that the most popular designs I've seen is a transitional design.
Hmm.
And what that is taking the traditional
Hmm.
design and sort of updating it. I see it in every aspect, whether it's in fabric or color or rugs or a style, so that it's somewhere between the contemporary and the traditional. It's
Hmm.
called transitional design.
Transitional. Okay.
And that aesthetic seems to be the most popular uh, in the younger generation that is slowly aging in place, are also interested in mid-century design,
Mm-hmm.
sort of the thin narrow legs and clean lines and no clutter, more straight lines. What's definitely coming back
Mm-hmm.
in terms of design trend is the Art Deco look. A lot of rounded pieces, a lot
Mm.
I go down to North Carolina to see what they have in terms of furniture, and the trend is definitely bringing back the Art Deco style, um, which is actually very nice,
Mm-hmm.
because it avoids those sharp angles we were talking about
Right.
built
Right.
into the furniture.
Yeah. Added benefit. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's more sculptural,
Mm-hmm.
um, and more each piece sort of makes a statement on its own. So
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And how about just we talked about um, having kind of a design that's universal for all ages. Are you seeing some of these things too come back because um, I've seen a fair amount of writing about you know multi generational households now. In some cases, uh, for sometimes for economic reasons, sometimes for caregiving reasons, but there's more attention to having the design because we're having multi generations sort of going back once again to the way things used to be.
yes, that's absolutely true. Actually, I find that that especially with COVID now, the
Hmm.
younger people move back in with their parents or grandparents moving in with their children. And back to that whole concept of having those spaces that are multi-purpose.
Hmm.
That becomes more and more important. The other, and that's definitely related to that multi-generational. I agree with you.
Hmm.
The other thing that I see is the open floor concept that was very popular for many years. COVID has kind of put a wrinkle in that because
Uh-huh.
people are looking for places to have some privacy in order
Right.
to work. So having a space that's flexible, if when you need it open, it's open, and when you need the privacy, you have your privacy. Um, that also creates another challenge
Right.
in terms of design.
Right. Right. Now, are there resources that you can point people to in terms of either some websites or actually, I want to make sure that we include your website as well. How can people reach you in your website?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I have my website is Interiors by Dafna Adler, and
Okay.
Dafna is spelled Dafna
Right.
Adler. So Interiors by Dafna Adler dot
Hmm.
com.
Right.
Uh, and then there are aging in place sites if for very that mention many of the things that I spoke about today, and just Googling aging in place to come up with several of these sites
Right.
that
Right.
list universal design, um, and give you uh, many of these suggestions.
Right, right, right. And I've been a member for some time of an organization called the National Aging in Place Council. I believe their website for the public is aginginplace.org. But so there are lots of resources out there. So for specific things about interior design, but also aging in place. So, well, we've come to the end of our program. I wish we had a little bit more time with you, but just wanted to thank you so much for being a great guest, giving us lots of great material. And I want to say to folks, if you missed this interview with Dafna, you can still catch my conversation with her by going to voiceamerica.com. This will be available as a podcast. Just go to my show 45 Forward. You can also find it on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and go to my website, roelresources.com, and you can click on the 45 Forward channel there too. So be sure to join me next Monday, 12 noon Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern, when I'll be talking with Elaine Miller-Karras, an author, social worker, and co-founder of the Trauma Resource Institute, and the host of her own terrific radio show, Resiliency Within. So until then, folks, keep moving forward, 45 Forward.